Hello, in this presentation, prepared for you by Natalie Melonic-Mulligan, Tala Rahal and Olya Tilling, we will delve into the question of how Article 94 UNCLOS 1982 and Regulation 14 of Chapter 5 SOLAS 1974 may contain barriers to the introduction of maritime autonomous surface ships. We hope you enjoy this presentation. So what exactly is UNCLOS? It is an acronym for the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, which came into operation and became effective from 16th November 1982. The Convention defines the rights and the responsibilities of nations with respect to their use of the world's oceans, establishing guidelines for the environment and the management of marine natural resources. The whole Convention has 320 articles. However, in this presentation we will narrow our focus to Article 94 and its relevance to autonomous ships. Article 94 UNCLOS defines the duties of the flag state. Before delving into the importance of Article 94 to MASS, it is first important to understand what a flag state is and why its duties had to be codified. The flag determines the point of responsibility and how and where a right can be enforced in relationship to that ship. Flying the flag has, out of practice, become part and parcel of customary law. In the Asia case, it was ruled that a ship not sailing under the flag of any state had no right to freedom of navigation. Eventually, the flag gained its recognition with the codification of the usage under first the 1958 High Seas Convention and ultimately under UNCLOS 1982. Article 94, more specifically, contains the duties of the flag state. In most general terms, the article sets out that each state shall effectively exercise its jurisdiction and control in administrative, technical and social matters over ships flying its flag. Article 94 of UNCLOS 1982, although non-exhaustive, lays down explicitly some of the administrative, social and technical duties to be fulfilled by states as part of flag state implementation. The main hurdles to introducing marine autonomous surface ships are the rules that specifically presume the presence of humans in the decision-making loop. The questions of whether the crew's tasks can be assumed by crew members from a remote location are not settled in any of the existing legal instruments, which in and of itself is a barrier to introducing MASS. Nevertheless, some specific major barriers are contained in the paragraphs of Article 94. Let's look at them in more detail on the next slide. Under Article 94.1, the matters on which the flag state is to exercise its duties is made explicit. That is, jurisdiction and control over administrative, technical and social matters. This in itself could be a barrier to the introduction of MASS, produced and owned by private companies who don't associate themselves with a specific state, although that is not necessarily a bad thing for the sake of international peacekeeping. Second of all, under Article 94.2, specific duties are imposed on the flag state. One of them is to maintain a register of ships flying its flag. The other is to assume jurisdiction under its internal law in respect of administrative, technical and social matters over each ship flying its flag and over its master, officers and crew. We will look into how containing a master, officer and crew is a limitation to the introduction of MASS when we look at paragraph 4b. But now let's go back to registration. The possibility to exclude small vessels from the register was created to avoid imposing onerous requirements on small local vessels or pleasure boats, which would not normally be used outside coastal waters. For these small vessels, international regulations, as well as the laws and regulations of the state of registry, are applicable to them and to their activities. This gives rise to a possible loophole for the introduction of autonomous ships. The question is, could MASS be treated similarly as unregistered drones lighter than 20 kilos, as specified by the Civil Aviation Authority? This would allow the introduction of MASS, although it is quite a far-fetched question. Lastly, let's look at paragraph 4b, which states that it is necessary for ships to have a master in charge of the ship. This is the main issue under UNCLOS, as autonomous ships have no master or crew members. They are human-free, thus they are incompatible with this provision. By definition, the wording of this provision prevents the introduction of fully autonomous ships. A Danish study has highlighted this in relation to fully autonomous operations and has argued but an amendment to UNCLOS would be necessary before the IMO could proceed with regulating the matter.
We will now proceed to discuss Regulation 14 of Chapter 5 of SOLAS. SOLAS is an abbreviation for International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea and came about in 1974 and has gone through multiple amendments. The SOLAS Convention includes 14 chapters that incorporate a variety of safety precautions and procedures that ships should follow under these multiple chapters and regulations found. Chapter 5 specifically of the Convention recognizes the safety navigation requirements for vessels at sea, where the flag states are the ones to provide that, along with provisions that are appropriate to all ships. Chapter 5 does not apply to warships, naval auxiliary, and other ships that are owned or operated by a contracting government and used only on government non-commercial service. And ships are defined as any ship, vessel, or craft, irrespective of type and purpose. Therefore, MASS could be considered as a craft under SOLAS. Regulation 14 of Chapter 5 specifically requires appropriate safe manning and issuing the appropriate document as evidence of the manning required. Responsibility of compliance with this regulation and the safe manning of ships is given to the flag state, as well as providing the appropriate suitable evidential documents of the necessary manning conditions. SOLAS has a broad applicability as it applies to all ships on all voyages, except for the exceptions mentioned before. As long as the safety requirements are met, there is no minimum amount of crew members required on board of the ship. At the end, Regulation 14 does not impose a certain way of functioning. It requires for each flag state to have their own mechanisms to ensure the safety of a ship in navigation. It is not entirely clear whether this regulation could pose a barrier on MASS, as there is no minimum number of people required on board. There might be a limited number of crew members or even 0 members. Therefore, this could be understood that an autonomous ship could have no crew members on board at all, and that would not undermine the safety of the ship. Therefore, Regulation 14 potentially is not a barrier. However, a ship having no one at all on board will not be considered as manned. Indeed, manned signifies that a physical person is present. So here, there could be a potential barrier with Regulation 14. It generates questions around whether MASS could be safe enough under SOLAS when it comes to the safety requirements in relation to the manning levels. So the main challenge here would be whether MASS could be considered to be safe enough and have the appropriate manning levels under SOLAS with fewer or even no members on board at all. Seen as it is up to each flag state to decide the safety requirements, they may allow MASS to be operated as long as these safety requirements are met with the implementation of appropriate systems of communication, maybe by being remotely controlled. Legal challenges and barriers, as well as the proceedings required, will depend on the level of autonomy and manning presented, where it will be more legally challenging to regulate fully autonomous ships in comparison to partly unmanned ships. This will be the case as well with the degree of human surveillance presented on board. The term manned might not necessarily mean that someone needs to be physically present on board. There could be a crew monitoring the ship from the land and to perform the tasks required remotely. There could also be crew members on shore in charge of maintenance. Indeed, there are challenges in relation to remotely controlled ships, and they will arise when the remote controller presumes control of the surveillance requirements, before it would have been an actual person on board assuming these duties. Therefore, we could say that remotely controlled MASS may comply with SOLAS. However, fully autonomous MASS will most probably be more challenging to comply with SOLAS, as they entail having no one, even on shore, to control or survey remotely. They are entirely autonomous.
Having discussed the barriers that Article 94 of UNCLOS and Regulation 14, Chapter 5 of SOLAS put on maritime autonomous surface ships, we need to think and ask ourselves what the future holds for MASS. On the surface, the answer seems simple: reform. However, what form should the reform take? The IMO has already released interim guidelines for regulation of MASS, while it sets out to create a more suitable legal framework to regulate them under. I will now discuss how we can satisfy the barriers in the meantime while the reform is underway. But what do we hope to see from the new legal framework and from the IMO? Barriers that are found in UNCLOS are easier to satisfy as the wording of Article 94 is more recommendatory rather than rigid and all-encompassing, making it easier to reform and suitable for regulating the regulation of MASS. We believe that having a shore-based operator is substantial enough to fulfill the requirement of having a master on board the ship. The requirement of having a pilot is more difficult to satisfy. However, we deem it necessary that exceptions be made in the new legal framework and among flag states for MSS in respect to pilotage, as it conflicts with the purpose of their self-sufficient nature. Furthermore, scholars such as Greg Bond suggest that the IMO should take a more proactive control of the regulation and enforcement of MASS, in the hope that it may lead to a greater harmony among flag states and the rules regulating MASS operations at high seas and territorial waters. The requirements in SOLAS are more inflexible than UNCLOS. Entrenching the requirement for humanoids, the regulation ties the requirement of a crew and the manning of a ship to the overall safety. By linking the safety standards to the necessity of it being manned, it makes it harder for MSS to satisfy the regulation. We deem that an approach akin to what Singapore has adopted should be taken. We should judge the level of manning required based on the ship type. Thus, as MASS are autonomous, they'd satisfy it through needing 0 humans on board to satisfy the manning requirement, which may actually improve the overall safety of the ship and satisfy any further requirements. As well as adopting a shore-based operation centre as an effective way to pacify the requirement for a crew in general, while we wait for more direct guidelines that are being formed in the new legal framework. Having seen the potential solution to the barriers, there are some concerns that should be taken into account. There is a danger to overregulating and developing a somewhat untested technology, as it could lead to a chilling effect on the whole industry and stagnate the progression. In addition to this development in the maritime industry, there will be extra training and qualifications required for those wishing to assist in the field of MASS. Re-education of the industry is essential in order to overcome the entrenched need for human presence on board ships. This takes time and resources as well as cooperation. The best way to overcome barriers for MASS and create an effective regulatory legal framework is through harmonisation of international and domestic law. Although the future is still unclear for the future of MASS, we can see that the steps are being taken for its future development, and the best we can hope for is that the IMO will take into account all the necessary steps and provisions needed to make MASS operational in the future. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and I hope that you found it informative.